Hi.
Oh, there you are. Okay. How's it
I don't
going?
have, I don't, my book's coming,
Mm,
but I did find one.
yeah, I did too. I bought a hard copy. I'm gonna start buying hard copies now. I also just got
Why is
this.
that? Oh, yeah. I saw that. He's been on television a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, yeah, my
I
dad.
find him very impressive in person, but we'll see.
I didn't find I didn't I've never really loved him.
Oh,
Um
really?
yeah, but and actually, my dad told me about this book and he was kind of
Yeah.
excited about it because he had seen an interview with Sorkin and I thought, Sorkin's kind of a lightweight. And then I do think that he kind of is. But then I saw him the All In guys, two of them, Freed interviewed him, and he said some actually intelligent things. And he
Yeah.
and he talked in detail about people, which is always what I like, when I'm reading like,
Sure.
Lundbergh
Yeah.
and he's naming names, and I'm developing this, network diagram of the plutocrats in the 1920s or whatever. And it sounded like he had those types of stories to tell in this. So I thought,
Sure.
well, okay, what the hell? I'll go ahead and get it. And I
Yeah,
am starting to buy hard copies of things.
oh,
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to do a, one in, one out kind of a thing with my bookshelves, I guess.
I'm diversifying my digital stuff, so I buy every other book from Amazon and Apple if possible.
mhm.
Just,
Uh,
I've always had this thing about having multiple, um, when you have a browser, I have different search
Mhm.
tools associated with each of the browsers I use. And
Right.
I don't know if I mean, just the whole notion of not bunching everything up in one place has always appealed to me. So
Yeah,
it's a
maybe
yeah,
little
that
harder.
bookshop.org's DRM to your diversified DRM
Yeah,
titles.
exactly. Yeah.
right. Well, and,
And
and you do kind of avoid single points of failure, I suppose. But yeah,
Right.
and that's the thing with Kindle, right? Is that, there is no, I mean, I'm basically just renting all 600 books or
no, well,
whatever.
well, I'm sure Apple's the same.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
Which on some level is annoying, and it's a little harder to move annotations and highlights into Readwise, which then goes from my Readwise to Obsidian.
Sure. Yeah. Mine too.
But other than that, I it just well anyway, it's a
Yeah.
silly thing maybe, but makes me feel better.
Yes. No, no, absolutely. Well, I've started. It's kind of funny because I may have mentioned already my dad had been he had been reading on like a first gen Kindle device.
Oh,
And I think he had one of those Kindle, the colored ones that you could watch
oh,
movies on that was like a little mini
The
iPad.
Android tablet.
But then those things kind of crapped out on him because they were like over 10 years old. And he thought, well, rather than shell out for a new one, I'll start actually reading the books because he's got a wall of shelves. And
sure.
I mean, actually floor to ceiling and then more stacked on the floor in front of the shelves and stuff. He's, just got a plethora of books. And so he's kind of reopening ones that he had read 20, we don't see anything. We just got the blankness behind you, Tim.
Yeah.
So maybe behind that blank screen there's a whole lot of something too.
No, no, no. It's a blank wall.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
It is a real blank wall. Okay.
Wait,
Uh,
wait, waiting for the show.
nice.
And my heart or my books, other than not digital, have been either I have a good friend who writes African-based crime novels
Mm,
of
Hmm.
South Africa. And so I have signed copies. And I have a couple other signed copies of things. And it's either a signed copy of something or a mistake when I order from, I push the wrong button when I order from Kindle and a book shows up
and you get a hard
on
copy.
my
Hmm.
doorstep instead of in my
Yep.
in my devices.
Yep. Well, and this one
So
was
this
this one was
maybe
was
the
necessary,
third
right?
one in
Because
the
I couldn't
last
find
10
one. Yeah. Well, and you bop back and forth from place to place, right? You have many homes. So
That's
yeah.
yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot.
Yep. So yeah. So this one, yeah,
Well,
I couldn't find an electronic
I
copy,
mean,
so I bought
No,
the
I
my,
don't think they exist. No.
I've been in the position where, for various reasons, normally house moves, or in my case, also country moves, continental move, Europe to Asia and stuff. I decided that important stuff needs to be in multiple formats and multiple locations.
Yep.
And also stickable on something like this, portable hard drive.
Right.
There's the upside of a digital one for the way we read for this is, of course, I can search the book, or more importantly, with the Calibre library software, I can search the library.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not constrained to one book.
Right.
So, so therefore, things like I think there's an idea, or I think there's something in the other book. I can't quite remember what the title was, but it's a David Graeber author, or it's a
Right. But which
whatever.
one is it? Right. Then you can go to the library. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can put them, depending on how you annotate your own notes. For me, it's 3 question marks. 3 question marks means there's like a task that's more than just a question.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you go back, you just you just look for the 3 question marks,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives you your first pass. It means you fill all the potholes you left behind,
Right.
and in maturity, once they've gone, you can plow on forward with the good work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In here. And so it's the one thing that I thought that was relatively missing in the Adler and Van Doren reading method stuff. And of course, it's because they're paper orientated. And it's like, what you use these sorts of things, the paper tags,
Right.
if you've only got a paper copy,
Mm-hmm.
and how much more difficult it is. Oh, I'm in a coffee shop. I've got half an hour. Let me go back through and pick out the most recent
Right.
3 question mark thing.
Right.
You could just easily do it. Whereas if you tag a book, you've got to have that book with you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in the context of flexibility, and context is a good word, because obviously context in that situation is exactly what Dave Allen's talking about when he talks about context.
Right.
Is the context you need to be on the phone, or is the context you need your library behind you, or is the context you need your laptop with, I hate to say it, but 48,000 books on it.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as I like real paper books, and there are a few,
Yep.
and physically, my high school life, the best job I ever had at high school was I was the summer holiday relief for my local authority librarian, and therefore I worked there like 48 weekends a year, and then did like a solid 4 weeks out of the 6 weeks of holiday that the UK gets.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I don't like books, and the even if it was something like Adler's, Western set of books that you've got in the back of a shelf. Yeah, you've moved your seat so you can't see the Western.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I have it back there. Yeah.
yeah. But you're a bit further away than you have been in some pods. And it would be great to have a copy of those sitting on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
such that if you felt like dipping, you could dip.
Yeah.
Um, and even if you are informally dipping, something goes, oh, that's interesting.
Hmm.
And even if you don't make it a proper Zettelkasten card, you can make it a quote or you can make it a note.
Right. Right.
And
Actually, what's back there is those are the, so there's the set, right? The 1952 set on that bottom shelf. And then above it on that shelf is over there is Emily, what's her name's Iliad and Odyssey,
Hmm.
so because I thought, well, yeah, I want, I have them in the, the 1952 set, but that's not a translation I really want to read. And that's not really a format I want to read it in. So what I'm trying to do is duplicate with the latest and greatest, like the Seamus Heaney, although
yes,
Beowulf isn't even
and
really
that
in that, I don't think.
and that
Wilson
is
might.
one thing where the storage capacity is such that I don't care that out of the 48,000, there's probably 8,000 that are one or more of.
Hmm.
So, and even if you go and get a physical book and you've got like a first or a second edition of something, and then you've got, oh, there's an everyman copy, and there's a foreword by somebody, and there's an afterword by somebody.
Right.
You don't need to reread the book because it's probably not a new translation because it might be an English author
Right.
or an English writing author.
Right.
But you've got a new foreword and afterword, so they
Right.
give you
Right.
different opinions,
Yep.
different context, and so if I see that, I grab it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's
I think Seamus
particularly if
Heaney's
it's something
got
I've
the
already
Tolkien
got.
Monsters and the Critics in the beginning. So
Oh, yeah.
so I
Mhm.
don't have to go buy a copy of that.
And when you give, you write most of your own materials for your classes, right?
Hmm.
What students get those as PDFs or what? Or you,
Students actually get those as in the one that I'm really actively writing right now, the Ancient and
right?
Medieval, they get it as an Obsidian published vault,
Hmm.
Okay.
and they use Hypothesis to annotate that. Um, so that way,
Would that resource, have you used any of the Notebook LM stuff? I guess
I've
what I'm
only
asking is, could
I've
your students put what you give them into Notebook LM?
I have, well, that's one of the reasons that I use that. I mean, I guess that if they wanted to go through the process, the elaborate process of cutting and pasting out of each of my, pages in the Obsidian published thing, they probably could. I don't know that they could, because it does come up as a set of, between a dozen and 2 dozen pages each week. So I guess theoretically they could, but I mean, I don't think I can 100% prevent that type of thing from happening, but what I try to do is make the hurdles enough so that they'll at least think twice before doing that, and they'll just consider, doing what they're actually supposed to do because it'll take less time. Like annotating,
I,
writing an annotation in Hypothesis, on a
sure.
page that exists might be easier than taking it, having NotebookLM interpret it for them, and then bringing that back and pasting comments into a hypothesis stream. It would seem very artificial.
Because I'm interested in Notebook LM's, new tools, and there's
Hmm.
even a version called, what is it called? Learn Anything, or they have a whole new thing where you're supposedly going to be able to submit a PDF. And I couldn't, I'm on the list. I didn't have access to that, but they have some examples of that.
Hmm.
And it
I
includes all
And
kinds of things like they will write, it will write examples, it, as I understand it, relevant to a field that you particularly have a background in or are interested in to explain a concept, which I suppose you could ask it to do anyway.
hmm.
But there's some really interesting stuff. I had the old learning, from the old textbook I wrote. I took the learning chapter because that doesn't change a whole bunch,
Hmm.
stuck it in there. And it's got some tools that are really interesting. It's got I would call it they call it video, but what it really is is like a series of slides,
Yep.
and then it lectures over top of them. It's
Mhm.
just, to me, that was fascinating to see how it would take my work
Yeah.
and turn it into one 30-minute lecture.
Yep.
I've
Yeah,
had issues with it just getting
Yeah.
things correct because I've thrown some of my own work in,
Yeah, I
which
did that. I
and
found that with some, when I asked it the question option, I disagreed
yeah,
sometimes with the
right.
question,
yeah,
but I didn't pay much attention. I didn't see any problems with the
yeah,
the lecture it gave.
yeah. I've had it give summaries back and when it was, and have had sort of the audio sort of podcast sort of
Right.
thing. And it was just factually wrong. And I'm like, I had to go back and read my own stuff
See, did
to
I
figure
read?
out if I
That's
actually
interesting.
mistakenly wrote something that I was writing against.
Right. So I know
Um,
they had that podcast thing where there's like two people, right,
yeah,
discussing. The
yeah,
the newer thing is it's like a series of PowerPoint slides
yeah,
with like an instructor talking behind
yeah.
it.
It's still the same model and
Yeah,
method behind
Yeah.
or in building it. And I continually throw stuff in there. And I've been doing research with some academics as well.
right.
And we had a collection of research, and I had read of the 12 papers, I had read six, and I was finding an awful lot of similarities. I'm like, okay, let me throw all 12 in there,
See
see what
what
it summarizes, and started asking questions about the six that I had read and looking for commonalities with the other six. And it was telling me things that I had read and marked up were not in the six that I had read or in any of them. I'm just like, this is just worthless.
Yes.
I'm like,
Well,
this is doing us
that,
damage,
Yeah.
well,
not helping
that
us.
said,
Yep.
I think some of what Mark's getting to is covered reasonably well by the last 2 months of output from Tiago Forte. He's been doing a lot of this is how I use it now.
Oh,
Mhm.
And I was watching one of the early ones of that where he coughed up that rather like you said about putting your work in and then asking it to summarize, etc. Um, he was conscious of the fact that he wanted the output from it to sound like he'd written it. So he's asking it not so much what's said, but how it's said,
yeah.
how I put the
Yeah.
tone. And he's got, 10 years worth of blog posts.
Mhm.
Sure.
And obviously he's changed tone over the time, but not radically. And so he's got I think it's a combination of Claude and NotebookLM.
Mhm.
So he's got all this stuff loaded. And so he's now typing questions into it, and he's already pre-loaded what he calls a prompt farm or a prompt collection,
Mhm.
whereby he's asking it, please write me a blog like X based on this topic
Mhm.
in my tone.
Yep.
And he had somebody else who came along with a business where they were writing business stuff, like marketing type stuff.
Mhm.
And because there's no actual fixed answer to that, it came over as being quite good. And within the 20-minute odd video where they're explaining how they're going to do it, they then show like a speeded up video of them going through these steps. And out comes like 90 sheets of paper.
Hmm.
And,
Interesting.
and it's
Interesting.
like 20
I
minutes
thought,
of work. 20 minutes of work and 90 sheets of paper come out.
oh,
Now, how good that paper is going to be very much depending on
right.
what you asked and what you put in. But if it's formulaic type stuff, you could be quite bad. And if you do it twice, you get two slightly different answers.
Mhm.
Right.
I
Yeah,
had two
that's
I just
kind
wonder
of
where Google thinks it's going with all of this, because
Yeah.
obviously the textbook companies either want to subcontract stuff
Right.
so that they offer a package deal to students and faculty members, students, whatever,
Access.
or they're going to try to do something that would work. I don't know how it would work with copyrighted material. That's
Yeah.
why I asked about,
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
what you give the students. I
Well,
just
well,
curious.
and the thing is, I actually got the one, the week or whatever you get before you have to pay the $300, from Google of the whatever premium service it was that got me access to NotebookLM. And then I canceled it within a couple of days because I wasn't really super impressed. I did do one of those videos from some of my content and I didn't love it. It wasn't as good as kind of I didn't think as my own lecture script.
Sure.
And also and it wouldn't use Google Books, right? So Google has spent all of these, when they spent like the first decade of the 21st century, right? Going to the University of Michigan, University of California, and scanning everything in the library, and the promise was going to be that this will be available, right? Google Books will always be freely available to everybody, and of course now it's not. And even the ones, and I've got, and I at the time I was paranoid, so I downloaded everything I wanted. I would find old sources and I would just download the whole books. And I still do that sometimes from archive.org, but it won't process them.
Oh, okay.
It refuses. It refuses. It's like, I mean, I have put large PDFs. Like I put the entire the PDF or the Word file of my entire biography of Dr. Charles
Hmm.
Knowlton into one of them. I don't remember even which one. And it told me, and it critiqued it. I asked it to critique it and it critiqued it. And most of the things it said were kind of dumb. And, and the suggestions were not really, I didn't think, very useful. But a couple of other experiences that I had recently were I with Grok 4 actually, because I am a X premium subscriber or whatever. And so with Grok 4, I used it to my advantage when I was making that. I've started making these little YouTube videos and I'm writing these scripts, that are like 10, 12, 15 minutes long on different aspects of capitalism and market economies and property rights and all of that. And I was going through and I was mostly trying to do it, in the Taleb style of if you can't, do it off the top of your head, then you really shouldn't be writing about this. But I was
Hmm.
I was sort of fact checking or I was verifying it. At one point I wanted, I was talking about the three elements of property that I thought came from classical antiquity, from Roman law, which was usus, fructus, and abusus. And I thought they were all part of dominium and all of that. And it had this lineage that went back to the 12 things, whatever they were in 450 BC. Um, but I validated because I said I wanted to be able to say, this began at this time. So I asked Grok, when did this triad of usus, fructus, and abusus get articulated? And I found out that it wasn't really from Rome. It was from this 12th century Italian jurist named Accursius, who was the
Hmm.
first one to have actually articulated it that way, and then that's where we get that tradition. So I put that in. It's like, well, okay, what the hell? I'll take it.
Hmm.
So that was, so I thought that was a useful, and I'm gonna tell my students, sort of that, sorry, that this is a way that you can use to, this is a thing that you can use. I mean, once then you have to go and fact check that and validate it and stuff.
Mhm.
But it can surface some things that I hadn't come across in my, reading of that over the years. So yeah, so that was, I thought that was helpful. And there was another, yeah, there was another instance. I do, as I'm sort of writing these things, because I'm not as much of an expert on ancient and medieval history, really. I haven't been
Hmm.
teaching it for as long, and it wasn't one of my teaching fields in my PhD program or anything. So I'm always just a tiny little bit paranoid that I'm going to miss something major. And I've got other sources and, primary sources, secondary sources, textbooks that I kind of look at to just try to validate that and say, okay, now I'm doing the period from the fall of the Roman Empire, roughly for next week to
Hmm.
probably 700-ish. So it's going to mostly be about, the rise of Islam. And and I kind of know the sort of the broad brush strokes of what I should talk about, but again, I'm going to check dates. I'm going to, and I can use, and I can use other online sources to check dates for things. What year, I think it was 632 that Muhammad died, but I'll double check that. And I'll use some type of an online source to do that. And then I probably will ask it, give me the 15 most important events, historical events, cultural changes or whatever worldwide, between those dates, and see what it comes up with. See if it comes up with anything that they hadn't been on my radar. And then if it does, then I'll research that stuff. So I think it can be I don't know, maybe that's cheating, but I think it's, it works for me. The funny thing about this is this week I'm actually having to read, I'm having to do all of the steps. I'm having to read and highlight and then take the highlights and, and put them on little note cards and, and the whole thing. And, and I am writing, I'm actually not going to be able to sell this because I'm highlighting, writing in pencil. I suppose I could erase the pencil marks and stuff, but 26 minutes in, I will say, not super in love with this book so far. It reminds me a lot.
Authors or what?
Sorry, Mark?
Just because it's multiple authors?
No, I think it's because it reminds me a lot of the conference. When I was in open educational resources, I would go to these OE global conferences, and I went to this one in Milan, and it was very much. I went to a subsequent one that it was in not Edmonton, the other place, even further away. Or maybe it was Edmonton. It was a long drive anyway, in Canada. And and that one was more indigenous focused. But the one in Milan was very UNESCO focused. And it was very, development goal 15 or whatever it is that covers open educational stuff. And it was very God, it was just the elitist of the elites, these people with, Italian, people who actually came, had roots in the Italian nobility and, from Venice, descended from the Doge or whatever. And, and just these Europeans who just, were just exuding this kind of liberal, and this was pre-COVID as well, to just immediately pre-COVID. It was 2019 November. So and I'm feeling this in here, when all of this acronym heavy and vaguely liberal ideas about development. And what is development? What is neoliberalism? And and a lot of, I'm just feeling like a lot of assumptions are being made along the way. Like I said, I've been trying to unpack, capitalism and what does it mean, relative to just market economies and free enterprise and,
Well, this is a textbook, right? I mean, it's sold through textbook sources, the used ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it feels like a
certainly got
reader's
used as a textbook. This feels like a book that would have gone on the syllabus for a survey course,
right.
in a
Yeah.
200 or 300 level
Mhm.
undergraduate seminar of,
Mhm.
capitalism and development kind of thing.
Yep.
Yep.
And it comes from a position, I think, on the left.
Hmm.
So I think vaguely was doing a lot of work in your statement there, Dan. This doesn't feel vaguely liberal to me.
Yeah, it's I don't
To the
know.
degree I've read, I'm only 3 essays in. I'm falling behind already, but
Okay. Well, I read it like a grad. I have to admit, I read it like a grad student. So I got through the whole 75 pages, but I probably didn't squeeze as much out of it as I might have if I had liked it better. But I hope I got the main points. I did think, I mean, the very first page, I thought it was interesting that that the first authors call out neoliberalism as this Anglophone,
Yeah.
um, which was
On that point, but one of the things I did, partly because I didn't know who the hell Keith Keith Hart was, who's like one of the main editors. I spent too much time on, here's the list of contributors and this is their paragraph.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
like, okay, who do I know? Who might I have heard of? And of course, this is not my field at all. So it's like, I know Keith Hart as a name because he's the first name in the book list.
Right.
And I know David Graeber because you bastards have made
I
me
know,
read
I
it.
was seduced by Graeber's inclusion.
And I'm pretty sure that was it. It's almost everybody else I've had to look up. But I was giggling in part with Dan's diatribe against, European elitists, because as I go through, I'm reading the paragraph, but sort of mentally counting North America, South America, the odd African, the odd other Asian, European. And it's like, where's the Brits gone? I mean, it's like there's half a dozen, right? But more importantly, of course, there's also not just this Italian person or whatever. It's like, I've forgotten what her name is now, but there was, O'Hara. There's an American, Sabrine, something like that, but with a U in the middle, O'Hara. She's an American and has been or is about to be president of the Environmental Economics Group in the US. Born, brought up, and did her first 2 degrees in German. Right? And so all of a sudden you start, okay, Graeber's in there, and of course she's down as being at Goldsmith in London, because this is like 10 years or give or take before he died. And he'd obviously moved on, gone to Paris, done the Occupy Wall Street and all the rest. And it's like, some of these people have really moved around, says me, 6,000 kilometers from home, sort of thing.
But he was still, I mean, even at the end, he was still associated with the LSE, wasn't he? The London School of Economics?
Yeah, but Goldsmith and LSE are sort of opposite ends of the same road.
Yeah. Right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Having done the new library, what is now the old library, but was the new library for LSE, with Uncle Norman. And it's like, I've got no chance of actually figuring out where all these people are coming from. What baggage are they bringing to this relatively small, short essay? How am I going to read this? And it was also.
I'm going to assume unless they jump out at me that they're just the vanilla suspects.
Yeah. And it was a bit like not so much the big myth, because it's just 2 authors, but the American myth, which had a chapter by the big myth authors. But everybody else in that book, I think there might have been 1 or 2 people I knew the name of, but I didn't really know the baggage.
Because Conway and Orestes had a chapter in that book too.
Conway and Orestes, I know them. I've listened to them. I've read them elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the American myth we read either just before or just after the big myth.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't too worried about them.
Right.
And I also recognized that they were using that book, the American myth, as a taster come marketing exercise for their own book. And so it's like,
well, yeah, the article that becomes the book.
So that's a piece of baggage that you know about and understand. And it's like, how does this person suddenly get on Tim Ferriss or whatever podcast? Right? It's because they got a book coming out, right? In most instances, or they've got a film coming out or whatever, right? So it may or may not be spoken about, but it's part and parcel of the baggage that that person's coming for this particular talk or this particular bit of piece of writing. So I can see certain instances within either Conway and Ostraces when they're not writing as a pair, that there are instances where they're not necessarily on point compared to, say, Merchants of Doubt or The Big Myth. They're slightly offline, and it's okay. Which is the digression? Is what they're saying now on a much more small focused thing that's likely only to have a professional audience talking about that very narrow thing.
Right. Well,
Or
and
is it,
what do they talk about when they're not, when they're not talking about the thing that they've agreed they're going to triangulate on to when they work together.
So
Yeah.
and it's you get that a lot in the pop science. So there's a guy called something Conway. It's got a three-part name, and the middle bit's Conway, and he's a paleontologist, and he wrote a backup book to Stephen Jay Gould's book about the Baffin Island sediments that gave all the Precambrian fossils back when the first time. It's Precambrian because there's no life, right? That's how it was originally.
Mm-hmm.
Then the fossils started coming through, and it was somewhere up in Canada from memory, and the stratigraphy began with the letter B from memory, and that became Gould's book.
Mm-hmm.
And then this other Conway did another one where it's got like 30 years more, 40 years more of finds to talk about. And that was a good book.
Mm-hmm.
Then he wrote something else. And the next thing is, he's a paleontologist, right? And he's well into evolution does this, but the geology tells us this, and he's an out and out fanatical Catholic.
Mm.
At which point, the third book went almost the wrong way, and it was an interesting progression.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so yeah. I guess I sort of glibly said I'm gonna treat them all as generic vanilla characters unless the name sort of jumps out at me. But maybe kind of Graeber is the exception, because I do feel a little bit like I was seduced into reading this, by knowing that Graeber was, in here, and that I thought, that sort of maybe raised the tone of the whole, the quality of the whole thing for me. Yeah. So I mean, I also, though, I will say that that at least, I mean, and I'm still, the page that I'm open to is still like pages 6 and 7 in the introduction before even getting to the chapters. But it does seem like, I could just go through and check all of the names that, I'm expecting, to see: Polanyi, Durkheim,
Mm-hmm.
and then Fanon and CLR James and Gandhi and, so, and Mouse, and, so there, boom, 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 boom. Okay. So that, in a way sort of kind of positioned it for me and set my expectations. But one thing that I did actually highlight in that beginning of the introduction was the object, they say the object of an economy was always the reproduction of human life, and beyond that, the preservation of everything that sustains life. And that just struck me as interesting in this moment when all of the developed economies are hitting these demographic walls, and populations are threatening to collapse. So if that had been the goal, maybe that would be interesting if they end up, later on in the book talking about that, that if that had been what economies were designed around and imagined to be for, what are they now, and how did they transition from the first phrase in that sentence to the second one, right? The reproduction of human life was the first reason. The second one was the preservation of everything that sustains life. Well, that can easily devolve into just gross materialist consumerism, right?
Well,
And so, so at what point does that, so that I thought that was, that was promising. Like, okay, I'll look for that in this. When does that happen?
Yeah.
And then they, and
well,
then, and they,
I saw that as a challenge to the Phoenician school, because they really don't have an answer to, and particularly taking it from an environmental point of view.
Mhm.
Your pollution is my problem, is their attitude.
Yeah.
And I go back and think to my law lectures at university were very much skimming, so you get enough of a basis of the actual law, so you don't design a building that screws up too much, although quite a few of them screw up. They don't necessarily screw up too much. And he did it. If you've ever seen the paper chase that was on film and a TV series out of the States, he taught just like Professor Kingsfield in that
series. Yeah.
In that Harvard Law School stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I remember.
And so of course he's got a bunch of engineers and architects, and we don't necessarily know the law stuff. And he always starts off with telling a story, is that you've got two elderly women friends sit down to have a cup of tea. Yeah. But Mrs. Smith decides she's going to have a ginger ale instead. And so you end up with Donahue and Stevenson, which is the case that gives us you have a duty of care at distance taught.
Okay. Yep.
And the case came up because back then ginger ale was in a stoneware bottle. So when they poured half of a glass out and she drank it, and then she poured the second glass out, flops out a part decomposed snail. And of course, she doesn't have a contract. She didn't buy it, her friend did. The restaurant or the tea house they're in doesn't have a duty, because they can't test every bottle. And they buy it commercially, right?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So you now, and of course, the people who make the ginger ale, you'd have thought that's where it rests. It doesn't. It because they subcontract the bottling.
Huh. So it's a cascade of externalities.
Yeah. So it's the end guide of and it's like we hear this story about two elderly women having a stop in a tea shop.
Yeah.
And it's not until he sort of gets to the end that you start going, hang on a minute.
What's the moral of that story? Buy local. If they had just bought a cup of tea, then anything that went wrong with it would have been the fault of the tea shop.
Yeah.
Okay. On a separate story of externalities. I was watching in addition to that Andrew Ross Sorkin interview that the All In guys did, that their weekly thing I watched actually earlier this morning, and they were talking about AI, the AI build out, and the extreme increases in the cost of residential electricity, right, that a lot of places are seeing, especially in places where 20, 30, up to 40%. I think in Virginia it's closing in on 40% of the grid now is going to data centers, and they're saying, well, and these guys, these guys who are tech billionaires and VCs are saying, well, we've got to do better messaging on the fact that that we have to explain to people what a token is and why AI is important and how it's going to be relevant in their economic lives and stuff like that. And I was thinking, and actually I wrote a long comment on this episode, and I said, maybe just have the AI companies or the integrators or the super stack or whatever they call themselves who are building out these data centers, maybe have them pay for the externalities. Maybe if there's an issue about about water usage, or if there's an issue about heat or noise or other types of externalities, maybe that would be their responsibility. who are going to make, billions and trillions of dollars on this thing. Or maybe, rather than rather than just sort of glom onto the public grid that had been built out as a public utility, so with government oversight and taxpayer contribution, rather than just suck that grid dry, maybe they should be responsible for their own power generation, right? And then finally, maybe they should tell that idiot Sam Altman to shut up about the next big thing we're going to do on ChatGPT is porn. Because I mean, I think we've already gone over the peak, right? I think
Yeah.
I think the American people are becoming disillusioned with language models already, and saying that the big
Yeah.
use case for them and the big profit center is going to be porn is probably the wrong message.
Okay, but Dan,
Yeah.
what of course, you're not saying in that, which I believe you're obviously are thinking, okay, this is, we'll probably touch on this when we do the next book, but they're already losing huge sums of money.
Yeah.
Why would they even countenance paying what they're actually costing?
Well,
But
they're
I mean,
they're also
that would
saying they're also
destabilize the house of cards even further than it is
right.
destabilized.
Right. No, I'm not saying that they're going to voluntarily do this, but they're also claiming, like David Sachs is on there claiming, well, we would have only a 2.3% GDP growth rate if we didn't have AI, because it makes up it adds another 40%. So now we have a 3.8. So if we want to be able to report fast growth rates, we have to subsidize this.
But I am sure somewhere in this book we're going to find a paragraph that is going to point out that what he's talking about is money GDP, not human GDP.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, that's the thing.
We haven't found that paragraph yet.
Well, it's all about what you measure, right?
Yeah,
Right.
listening to the
Well,
academics and the folks who are like really close to the Gen AI companies and talking about particularly what OpenAI has been talking about, because they're spending 30 billion a year. They are losing 30 billion a year right now. And they're saying in 5 years they will hit profit.
Mhm.
But at that point, they are going to be spending 300 billion a year to be profitable, which means where the hell is that money coming from? Because people aren't finding what they're doing now valuable
Well,
enough to spend on it.
except that their market cap apparently is $500 billion, right?
Yeah.
So it's all a shell game.
And what's their PE ratio, Dan?
Yeah, there's no PE. There's no P.
It's like 2000 right now. It's like 2000 to 35,000%
Yeah.
PE.
I mean, there's no E, rather. There's no earnings. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They do have earnings, and the earnings are impressive until you look at what they spend.
Right. Yeah. The net. I mean, yeah. Right. Let's talk about gross revenue. Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to this though, pulling back to the book. I'm sorry I went on that little rant. That was probably for the next book.
The AI centers is a good classic. Their pollution is my problem.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Well, that was why I brought it into the discussion, right?
Yeah.
But it also talks, it also does talk in here about, sort of this idea that, market society sustained by a concern for individual freedom generates huge inequalities, is one area of concern, one statement. And then along with that goes this submission of the economy to the political will on the pretext of equality led to suppression of freedom. So, we got a dilemma here. How are we gonna resolve this? And that's all I got out of the introduction, and then I kind of they just summarized what they're going to do in each section. But then I got this first essay, right, about globalization. Speed up. I thought the idea of speed up, was interesting, and they set sort of the scene for this increase in transportation and travel time using these different technologies. I would also, and communication also, I would also add, kind of like directionality is also important, right? Because, for the longest time, you couldn't, until you had, steam powered boats, you couldn't really, you had to depend on the wind out on the ocean, and you couldn't really, steam up against, the current of, the Mississippi or the Missouri River or whatever. So, it's not until you have them that you open that, $500 million, square miles of territory to bi-directional trade rather than just to people, floating their grain surplus down to New Orleans and then burning the flatboats for fuel. But then money,
Yeah,
tax
Erickson.
writing, all of that other stuff too, all that infrastructure, all that E.P. Thompson stuff that he wrote about back in the day. That was all interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, Erickson's rather well known in globalization, and it. A few of the names, there's like 5 or 6 of them that were familiar to me,
Mhm.
and then going through the references at the end of the chapters or the essays, there's a ton of very very familiar works and names in there. But the Erickson piece goes back to the first one he points to is sort of the rise of network society by Castells, that is a basic reading in undergrad for upper class undergrad and sort of introductory reading in grad schools for
Mhm.
anything that is economics or business or interconnected business.
Right.
If you're doing anything in like digital work or policy or anything along those lines, you go through at least the network society, if not the other 2 or 3 in the set.
And then Stiglitz is mentioned in that one too, and then talked about much
Yeah.
more extensively in the next chapter.
Yeah, Stiglitz in a bunch of this.
Yeah.
And it also, one of them brought up Rawls and Waltzinger. And Rawls is one of my favorites, John Rawls, but there was no reference at the back. I was like, hey,
Yeah.
like where's Rawls in this?
Right.
Like you bring up Rawls, and I'm like, it is a it's key to what there's like a set of paragraphs that were talking about things. I'm like, and then it didn't follow up. I'm like,
Yeah.
missed opportunity. But the globalization, Erickson often comes up, and when I was trying to find a PDF because my book wasn't supposed to arrive until this next week, and I'm like, okay, let's see if I can find a PDF at least of the first section
Mhm.
or loose papers. And so it was going author by author, essay by essay.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I realized I had about 5 or 6 of Erickson's papers already tucked away, and a couple of them read. And Han is another one that I have quite a few things on or from.
Mhm.
But it's the Erickson piece I thought was a good opening piece. It wasn't deep. It was just sort of scratching the surface.
Mhm.
But I thought it was good. It
Yeah.
was like a good framing.
Yeah. Another element of that I thought was interesting was, on 26, he starts talking about the annual total sales of transnational corporations, right? In the 2 decades between 1982 and 2000 to go from 3 trillion to 18 trillion, right? Which
Yep.
is, which is certainly not about I guess maybe it is maybe there's an element of containerized transportation in that responsible for that increase, but I think it's really very much more sort of globalist deregulation of kind of trade barriers, NAFTA
Hmm.
in the Americas, and then the other things that led to to things like ultimately to
The,
TPP.
the fun thing I think on those sorts of areas is show me the container that's not regulation size,
Mhm.
There
right?
isn't one.
Show me the USB-C that's not regulation size.
Mhm.
I mean, about the closest you get to that, but it's not regulation size, is almost every country in the world has their own power socket in the wall.
As a plug, yeah, right. But that again, that is temporal, right? That has to do with, with that, all of that emerged before this globalist moment, all the different wall
Well,
socket standards.
other than here, we're like a quarter of a way across Asia. Here, we have a British 3-pin safety plug and socket.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's
that's
Yeah,
imperialism.
empire.
In,
Yeah.
in UAE, United Arab Emirates,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, but it's only 54 years old. So 55 years ago, it was still run from Westminster.
Well, but the trade relationships that lead to those power standards being adopted follow from imperialism, don't they? I mean, can we agree on
Mm-hmm.
that?
Well, sort of, but
If it's run
then
by
it's like,
Westminster, there's certain leanings
yeah,
of
yeah.
that minimum.
Well, but if you then go to, say, the opposite extremes of the empire, Canada to Australia, neither of them use the English 3-pin or the British 3-pin plug.
Adjacent
When I was in
Canada's
school,
adjacent to a source of over an overwhelming source of a low-cost alternative, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
well, Australia's not adjacent to anything fucking other than water. But it does have a 3-pin plug, and it does follow the same pattern, except the pins are round and not square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I
When I
can't
was
remember
when I was
what
living,
county. But the oddball one in the electric terms though is Saudi. Saudi is the other place that does 60 hertz electricity from the sun.
Ah, interesting.
yeah, when I was living in
Everywhere
England,
else,
That probably has to do with
literally,
Aramco.
well, everywhere
I'm
else,
going to find
and in places
plutocracy
like
at the base of everything.
yeah. And it's like, so let's just list it off: Czech Republic, Germany, France, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Turkey, here,
Mhm.
Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Qatar, we skip Bahrain for some strange reason, Oman, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, China. It's all 50 hertz.
Okay.
It's all 50 hertz, right? There's nowhere, and more importantly, they do sensible voltages that kill you, as opposed to you wimps want safety with this. 110 volts is the safe stuff we use on building sites
Mhm.
for
Well,
electricity.
all right. Okay, fine. I think we're going down a hole here.
mhm.
To the dialectics of globalization. That section. Is that the same? That's the same article still. But this whole idea of shrinking and expanding and homogenizing, and then cosmopolitanism versus fundamentalism, all of these italicized things that I kind of highlighted in here. I mean, it seemed to me two things. It seemed to me that, oh, and I wanted to mention because I raced by it. The thing that I put up there, the Rick Beato takedown of Chat GPT that I put in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
blew my mind. It was so good. I thought he was just going to be kind of catty about things, but he actually went on he went kind of on a deep dive into the way that AI is trying to, and presenting itself as being expert in like production techniques. And then he goes and he says, well, I've talked to Max Martin and I've talked to these, all of these actual music producers, and none of them have ever published their techniques or even talked about them in, podcasts or anything that AI could scrape. So you've got all of this very high level expertise that is not getting reflected in this, in these models. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that maybe stands for more.
It
But this thing here with all of this is kind of I mean, I was reminded of William Gibson, right? The whole, the future's here, it's just not evenly
mm-hmm.
distributed sort of thing. So
Yep.
that whole issue of the shrinkage someplace, shrinking the world by facilitating faster contact, expanding the world by, creating awareness of difference. And then there's that whole, but this is where I was sort of feeling a little critical about this, about, okay, these people maybe are a little bit too embedded in their own bubbles as they're writing these things, because the big thing that stands out to me in this, this question, this globalization makes universalist cosmopolitanism possible. Well, that existed all the way back to the Ottoman Empire. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's nothing immediately new. And then this reactionary fundamentalism that comes, as some type of a sociological or anthropological, schismogenesis or whatever. Where's the class? Where's the colonization? Where's the imperialism in this discussion, right? Where's the, where's the source of that tension, right? I mean, it seems,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm being
It
too obstreperous here, but
yeah. It was one of the I kind of hit that in grad school in public policy, because it's like it focuses just on sort of modern world and not how we got to modern world.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of echoes going back to how, the large powers became large powers,
Mhm.
or, became large powers, or then started losing sort of their grip on things.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and there's one chapter that it was bugging me, and I need to figure out why it was bugging me. But it was just the one on the development section.
Yeah.
But it was just, what development should do, aid, other stuff. And it, being in DC and having, worked with a bunch of different organizations and having, knowing an awful lot of people that work at World Bank, IMF, other stuff, and then had worked in policy issues around ITU and telecom and satellite issues. Just got to know an awful lot of people in a lot of different places, and and getting into long, hours long discussions at conferences with OECD lawyers,
Mhm.
just about moving data and the value of data. And we're doing advisory papers for, large multinational companies on how they can get their manufacturing data out of North Africa
Mhm.
back to, a central aggregation point nightly that's in, Belgium or other places, and then
That's
being able
safe.
to
Yeah.
take that aggregation and get it to wherever else,
Right.
and just figuring out, how much did we manufacture where, how much of it got shipped out to different endpoints,
Mhm.
but it all has to go, be transferred somewhere. And there are restrictive countries in, North Africa, sort of Middle East area, where they want to know what everything is before you transmit it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that can take days.
As if it's a written memo, and they get to read
Yeah,
every single one. Yeah, at the board.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it was very entertaining, but it's also just sort of, sort of those offsets, for the externalities. And like, what do you do to be able to
Yeah.
do manufacturing in a certain area?
Yeah.
How are you not damaging sort of what is around your factories and so forth? Also, as I was reading through various pieces where I was talking about things not really working well, like aid,
Yeah.
was thinking of the two Green brothers, John Green and Hank Green. So both authors, but both of them had started like Crash Course, a whole bunch of different things, and they have tons of money that comes in, and they just um, essentially take what gets them through and then donate to the rest. So they have built a hospital uh, for maternity and infants in an African country, I think
Oh,
Sierra Leone,
oh, good for them.
and they have raised millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and they have like fundraisers each year on top of things. And there's like a sock club, but it's like Crash Course donates to it,
Nice.
like the 3 or 4 education things that they've got.
Hmm.
But it's like they're making a huge impact.
Yeah.
And John Green took a break from his young adult novels and wrote a book on tuberculosis and how we have tuberculosis and how
Mm-hmm.
we got very close to eradicating it, and now it's coming back
Mm-hmm.
and have issues. And a lot of it had to do with, it's out of its patent coverage, but yet the Johnson and Johnson has been wanting to still charge high rates for it around the globe,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it started coming back again.
Mm.
And it's like we could eradicate it in 4 years or 5 years.
Wow.
And so they're just like, how do we raise money to get the cost of,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
you know,
How do we raise that money to pay for it? Yeah, and as you were talking, I was the image that flashed into my brain was Eleanor Roosevelt holding the big poster of the entire Charter of the United Nations. It's a
right.
black and white photo that I use all the
Yeah.
time, in my lectures and my textbooks and stuff. And and sort of like, where did that idealism
Hmm.
and that type of sentiment become, what it is now? Where did this go off the rails? I mean, it's sort of like, like back, at the beginning of this year when the Doge people were going crazy and they were going after
Yeah.
USAID, and it's like, oh, USAID is
Yeah.
just a front for the CIA, and it's like, well, it wasn't always, and maybe and
And it
maybe
still
now,
isn't.
well, yeah, exactly, and maybe some of the things that it's doing now have gone off the rails. But how did that happen? And when did an actual interest in real development turn into,
Hmm.
the development that the IMF and the World Bank, do, and the World Trade Organization do now. At
Yep.
the beginning of the third chapter, the global public goods chapter, um, Golub and Marischal say that,
Yeah.
as Stiglitz points out, globalization today is not working for many of the world's poor. It's not working for much of the environment,
Hmm.
yada, yada, yada. It's not designed to,
Right.
right? I mean, but then unfortunately, they launch right into sort of Paul Samuelson and this idea of,
Hmm.
of this, and that again, okay, maybe it's my biases, but I sort of then I begin to tune out,
Well,
right? Because it's sort of like,
Yep.
Samuelson is
well,
my,
there's
sort of my quintessential example of description becoming prescription in economic theory.
Hmm.
So,
well, the thing that jumps to me in that context is the book you guys all chose not to read, which was the Rory Stewart book about his last few years in politics. That because apparently it's not out of the US in Audible version. And of course, he was an NGO worker and a diplomat, and he's been the development minister, right? And in terms of environment, was also the person responsible for flooding in the UK at one point, because
mm,
he got moved around because
mhm,
of changes of leadership and all the rest of it back in. So
yeah.
you see all of those,
Hang on just a second, I'm gonna get some.
you see all those connections coming back. Um, and the way he talks about a lot of it is the effort really goes into the non-aid elements of how do I get a bit like where Thomas was talking about how do we move the data. And it's
Hmm.
like when I first came here, I it's got to be 10 years from when I turned up here. 10 years before was the last time I sent an actual paper to paper fax.
Mhm.
And yet, partly because of the Arabic script,
Hmm.
even your driving license gets given to you based on a fax
Mm.
when I first came here.
Hmm.
Now it's literally all electronic. And you only need to walk in with a memory stick and you're good to go.
Hmm.
So um, here's really has really changed. The whole government now is basically e paperwork. You don't need a physical copy of almost anything. You know? The only thing you really do need a physical copy of is the ID card, which links back, in my case, to Visa and all the rest of that.
Mm. Yeah. I don't have much more to say about that chapter. So then there's the international organization chapter.
The
Um,
acronym and initialism chapter.
the real acronym, the heavy acronym chapter. Holy crap. Um, yeah. And I didn't highlight them all. I only really highlighted IMF, World Bank, WTO. Um, and then and then and then I noted actually several pages later that Bretton Woods, right,
Hmm.
is the source of those, or at least
Or just as likely,
hmm?
there's that book we had with Claire Tabby on the intersection between the British and the Italian recovery
Yeah.
from
Oh, right,
World
right,
War
right, right,
One.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That, it's, but that seemed to, I mean, the point of that, and especially that paragraph where they talk about Bretton Woods, seems to be that, that this, sort of comes from within a bubble, within a bubble of education and worldview and background, elevated backgrounds, lead to the same kind of analysis sort of thing. And then it goes on for pages about the Washington Consensus, and even uses the words Chilean model. It's like, holy crap. Those are, I mean, for me, those are loaded. I mean, I did my master's work on Chile, and those are loaded
Huh.
words. Chilean model, as if it's this like benign economic idea that was democratically somehow agreed on and mutually, some type of consensus determined that it was beneficial. This was this was post Pinochet coup, imposition at gunpoint on the Chilean state, by the Chicago boys and all of these neoliberals, who came down from the United States. And so the whole, I mean, so I had trouble reconciling the the whole idea that this is somehow about something that's in any way, but at that point, I mean, for me, 1973 is 9/11, 1973 is a big, that's a watershed moment.
Hmm.
And that what comes after that is not about development in the same way that as I mentioned earlier, Eleanor Roosevelt holding the charter of the UN is about development, and about
Yeah,
some
but
idealist, thing.
your Green Deal got your rural electrification, right? It got your interstate.
The New Deal did, yeah.
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 So,
And that was often at gunpoint. The damming of rivers that people didn't want dammed and stuff like that.
and now they're undamming rivers,
Yeah.
right?
So in some cases, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
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 So obviously the UK equivalent of the interstate is the motorways. They never really started till the mid-60s.
Okay, so the major highway, the freeways in
Yeah.
the UK came after the American
Well
Highway Act.
after World War II.
Okay, yeah.
But
Our Interstate Highway Act was in the 50s.
It's hmm
all right, okay. So, but the other thing that came on there was we're going to build these such that our combat aircraft can take off from them too.
Yes, right. Or
Yeah.
emergency
So
land on it.
that was part, and then Eisenhower had picked up from the Germans and being able to move everything around. There was no highway that went across country.
Right.
And there wasn't
Yeah.
any way to move anything around should the U.S. get attacked. So they built the interstate.
And there was even an idea that we were going to have, truck-mounted ICBMs, that were going to be tooling around so that they'd be harder to take out, which never really materialized. But in this development chapter, right, we get this idea that, and one of the things that did, there are these little pockets, there are these little moments of, okay, that's something that I can sort of hang on to as a historian. So in 1800, the world's population is 1 billion, and only 2.5% of them, 1 in 40, live in cities. And now we're at 8 billion or whatever we're at, and more than 50% live in cities. And I've tracked that very closely in American history. That moment of tipping point when we went to more than 50% of the population being urban, probably the 1920s.
One of those tripping points like that I think of is, and by quirk of fate, it's partly a historical thing. Is pick a famous person for something that they got famous for in their late 20s, 30s, say, and what was around when they died or became unfamous or whatever. And the classic to my mind is like the Duke of Wellington, in terms of, Battle of Waterloo and all the rest of it. So
how long did he last?
His part. Oh, he lasted the bulk of the 1800s,
Wow.
equivalently. So he's born in the late 1700s something.
Mm-hmm.
albeit to a Anglican elite family.
Sure.
He's fighting the Irish. He's then shoved out to India to fight the Indians. He comes back and goes through each of the times we have to fight France. And of course, partly because the Napoleonic Wars are so big, everybody forgets we're already fighting France before that because of what you know as the French and Indian Wars and,
Right.
and the original.
Yeah, and that's the and that idea of when we're at war and when we're at peace is so crazy, because that came up in my modern world history class today. I began talking about World War One, and one of the stories, one of the misconceptions about World War One is that it was a break in 100 years of peace in Europe. I was like, that was bullshit. There's no 100 years of peace. What do you call the Crimean War? What do you call the revolutions of 1848? I mean, what do you actually
or even French and Prussian War? You don't even need Germany.
Yeah.
Oh
well, all those wars that Bismarck used to unify Germany. Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And particularly as we go back to the Anglophone part. Anglophone wise, we know about Waterloo and the Napoleonic stuff because we are at risk and we're the primary coalition builder against Napoleon because we want this balance of power. We can't dominate. We don't have the population to be able to dominate Europe, but we've got the Navy, right? So we're safe in inverted commas. And we've got the whole of the world for trade, so we're fine. But we don't want a bad guy to suddenly pop up and say, "Oh, I've got Europe," even if it was Swiss. So we've got that issue, and it's not until you start breaking it down that you realise that Wellington became famous as Arthur Wesley before the invention of the iron bridge, let alone even the steam engine, right? And when he became prime minister, he's dumping all the canals to put train lines in. So he's gone through the whole cycle of technology in that context. And then it's like you go a little bit more personal, and I'm sure with everybody we've still got left on this conversation, pretty much the same. My grandparents, when they were at school and you heard an engine, you were allowed out of the classroom to go look up. Because in my case, it's a Zeppelin.
Oh, wow.
Not necessarily a military one, because they were civilian before and after World War One. But you get let out of class to go look at a Zeppelin, and yet my grandparents, all four of them, were still here when we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
So that's just a step and a half, if not more, right? In the tech terms, in terms of development, and the comment I got from my mother in that context, and we bring it back to the development side, at the point of which I'm pre-teen, I've effectively got one black person in my class. He's got a white brother because he's a war orphan from the Biafran Nigerian civil war. But the reason you have to eat all of your dinner is because there's starving children
around somewhere.
And that's not really the reason she's doing it. It's because she's a World War II baby child, and therefore she was in her
scarcity was part of her. She
was just about to be married, if not actually married, before rationing from World War II stopped in the UK. We were mid-50s. We were 10 years almost after World War II was still with rationing, not necessarily the whole thing, but there was still rationing going on. And it's the and now the anti-globalization, seeing we get to chapter 6, as it were.
Yep.
How does the UK feed itself if the supply chain collapses?
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, and that's and actually that's something that, oh God, what was that guy's name? There was a guy who wrote for The Guardian all the time who was really focused on that issue, on kind of sovereignty and food security. It'll come to me. But one of the things along the way, as I was racing through that on the way to the anti-globalization chapter, I wasn't reading that much about it with that much interest. But then the one thing that did jump out at me was Africa is going to be 1.8 billion by 2050. Okay, so we've got so there's a demographic, right? There's that, going back to that whole question of development and who's it for, right? And what problems is it meant to address? And one of the issues that it would seem like, and I don't think they really wanted to go there in this, but one of the things that it would seem like is that, how are you going to keep those Africans down on the farm?
Yeah. And that's part of the USAID was essentially having that sort of piece.
Yeah.
And the term that I kept on waiting to show up was extractive economies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it didn't pop up. I was like, when's this going to show up? If it's
where's King Leopold, for crying out loud?
And it's just
Well, these are the Europeans, right? They don't. Let's not talk about
when I was
you say Leopold, you mean Aldo Leopold?
No, I mean King Leopold in the Congo.
Oh, right. Okay. I was wondering which way you were going, because obviously King Leopold of Belgium is the extractor.
Yeah.
Aldo Leopold is to do it locally and feed locally.
Yeah. No, exactly. Right. And the whole, that whole issue of, that's and again, that's what has bugged me about this first section, is this idea that we're not gonna really call it what it is. We're not gonna really say that this is what globalization was for, and this is what this relationship between the developed and the developing, and of course, was all about all along. So go ahead.
Of course, at this level, what you really need to be talking about is the late 1800s, early 1900s, Britain versus India.
Well, and Britain in the,
somebody, I can't remember who
the
it
Ottoman
was.
Empire. The mandates.
But
oil in
somebody sat down and worked out how much money we actually took out of India. In the wider sense, right?
Yeah.
And it's something stupid like 37 times the current GDP of the UK.
Right. Yeah, that was another thing that popped out of that all-in podcast this morning that I commented on too. I wrote like a paragraph long comment in there, and I said, okay, so Chamath had been saying something about how China was, we think of China as this emergent global power, and he said, but China thinks of itself as returning to global power. Right. And he says that, and then he goes on to say, from the 1500s to the present, China was the biggest GDP nation, or group or empire, whatever you want to call it, in the world 70% of the time. And I would add to that, I would say, and then he said, and then they took their eye off the ball, he said. It's like, so that was what I commented. I said they didn't actually. I said I agree with you on that. Well, good on you for pointing that out. But they didn't take their eye off the ball. The British Empire allowed the East India Company to get everybody who was important in running Chinese society addicted to opium, like 4 million plus people. So if you have this Confucian system, right, and these people, these educated people who have the silver, right, which is what the East India Company wanted, because China didn't want anything but silver for tea or anything else, right, silk, porcelain, and so in order to, what happened? Oh, okay.
This is
All right,
this of course is
go save America. All right, you gotta go. Yeah, we don't. Yeah,
no
go, yeah.
no king today.
But no kings today. Be safe. Yeah. All right, ciao.
But if you read slightly different skew wise, the James Cavell Asian saga, you get all of that history, albeit not quite correct, and not in the order that he wrote the books, because those are out of order anyway. Um, but when I read them, and I still haven't read King Rat. I've read all the others.
I don't think I have. Yeah.
And I was going in and out of Iraq and Iran when I read the last one, which was a bit of a quirk. But the even if you look at where would you pick this up from a popular science, output from? And you see, we all got used to the American Al Capone stroke, The Wire, come whichever mafia type film movie you want to pick of. You go look at the more recent output of things like the Peaky Blinders, series. That's now completely fictitious. The Peaky Blinders existed as the Peaky Blinders, but they in the first season they flip out on this guy from London. I forget the name of the guy. That's wrong. It was the other way round. The London-based guy beat the Brummie people, so the Peaky Blinders disappeared.
Oh, I know who you mean. The horse race guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the horse.
Yeah, he's a real character as well. Yeah.
Yeah, he's real as well.
Yeah.
So everything that is very Peaky Blinders thereafter is not Peaky Blinders, but is mishmash of everything else.
Right.
And I've got no idea how close when Thomas Shelby in like season 5 and 6 becomes a politician.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but he does rub up against once again real people who about whom Americans were not aware, right? Like Oswald.
Oswald being the obvious one.
Yeah, but in American gangster stuff, really probably the big not Al Capone is minimally relevant, right? It's the other people who figure, in like Boardwalk Empire, who figure much more centrally, right? Like Lucky Luciano and especially Meyer Lansky, right? And this is where the conspiracy theorists, sort of pull in all of this, Meyer Lansky, J. Edgar Hoover,
and Gotti and all the rest of it.
And this whole
but that moves away from
blackmail.
Yeah, but that moves away from the alcohol-driven via drugs into all of the stuff Las Vegas.
Right. Well, and the connection is the was it the SIS or whoever it was initially that did that deal with the gangsters after, was it Luciano had been sent back to Italy? One of those big guys had been deported back to Italy, but they used them against the fascists. And they collaborated with them against the fascists, and so that kind of creates this this connection between the intelligence agencies and organized crime. Yeah. This with the US, there's a statement in here though that says where they say that with less than and I think it's one of those ones that's expected to be accepted uncritically. With less than the U.S. budget for the Iraq War, the world could eliminate extreme poverty. Cost 135 billion in the first year, rising to 195 billion by 2015. I just want to stop there.
that would cause me an awful lot of pause because it's like you have amounts, but it's like what end to the amount, and I'm like handing money over for what?
Right, we're gonna give everybody a paycheck.
Yeah,
that's gonna take care of the problem.
Yeah, and it comes back to like the not having understanding that it's an extractive economy issue. So if you're doing that to get a regenerative, issue, and people can stand sort of on their own and develop,
Yeah.
and sort of
And they can develop
get to
into
a,
good consumers of first world products.
this is where you
Yeah.
this is
How
where
can
you need
iPhone?
to move. This is where you need to move to, say, Afghanistan rather than Iraq, because Iraq was an extractive
Oh, always.
economy
Sure.
beforehand,
Yeah.
and that's also why we made them our allies and all the rest of it.
Right.
Whereas nobody cared about Afghanistan in that context, other than it's a bit like Vienna or Berlin after World War II. It's the place where the British Empire butts up against Russia.
Touches it. Yeah, exactly. Well, and another example is Argentina, right? Where, I mean, the big bad in Argentina, I mean, aside from the guy who's in there now, but some people don't like, but the big bad in Argentine history is Juan Perón, right? Who was a very popular populist leader, and what was his focus? Oh, right, it was import substitution industrialization to get off of the dependency on the first world for everything. Because and it goes all the way back to when Simon Bolivar invited everybody to the Congress of the Americas in Panama, and the U.S. couldn't get their shit together to go, but in 1826, but Britain went. And the Monroe Doctrine had said, well, you can't intervene here, but they did kind of sneak in there and made a bunch of trade agreements, and their pitch was, hey, we know manufacturing, global comparative advantage, economic theory says that the world will net benefit if you guys in Argentina focus on raising cattle on the pampas and sending us the hides, and we'll turn them into leather goods and send them back to you. That's the next phase of imperialism.
And then they try and take the Falklands back. Oh, sorry, the Malvinas. And we have to go spank them.
That was two pathetic administrations. Although, of course, there's that great quote. Somebody in here quotes Maggie Thatcher saying, "There is no choice." Or is it? There is no alternative, as Mrs. Thatcher stated on page 64. Yeah.
All right.
Focus on the local level. The relocalization thing I thought was a little bit interesting. And they talk about, relocalization, they talk about degrowth, which, and then they associate that with names like Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales, which again doesn't mention them as alternatives or opponents of imperialism, right? And doesn't, and doesn't really kind of position them as, it's like, well, okay, we have this, this sort of, leftist this thing going on in Latin America. What might have caused that? I didn't see the United Fruit Company mentioned at all in here.
Well, the other thing, the other slight on that is obviously World War II, with all of the import of the German data and the German scientists into Chile, Argentina, etc. And it's like, so why in 1950, mid 53, 55, is Argentina building jet fighters? It's because it's straight off the drawing board from Nazi Germany. Yeah. And there are clearly oddball things going on.
Why were the French
in
building
that context?
Certainly comparative advantage would argue against that.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought we took the garage plans away with us when we'd done Waterloo.
Yeah. So, and then and it's kind of funny because Cecil Rhodes. A couple of weeks ago, I had my students in modern world history read Cecil Rhodes' kind of confession of faith or manifesto or whatever you want to call it, about how the more of the world English-speaking people control, the better. And as a matter of fact, why don't we try to get America back by setting up these secret societies? And so, and they get a chuckle out of that. But then I also have them side by side with that. I have them read Kipling's The White Man's Burden, right? And which it's easy to, I mean, it's almost like low-hanging fruit, and it's very easy to, for me to sort of talk about the scientific racism and social Darwinism and everything that's sort of inherent in that idea that that the Americans should pick up the white man's burden and follow Britain in the mission of dragging these brown obstreperous children kicking and screaming up the hill to civilization. But every time I do that, or maybe increasingly each year as I do that, I start to feel a little bit guilty, like, all right, this was easy, this was this was an easy shot to take against empire, but what about? And I hesitate to even say this because it's sort of like saying, well, Mussolini made the trains run on time, or or something like that, or Hitler built the Autobahn. These and in the context of, in the context of this, I do think it's relevant because I think that that these people are a lot of these authors seem to be kind of blindly imagining development as having been something, development, that began during the 19th century with imperialism. I mean, in addition to all of the money, all of the Mughal wealth that Great Britain took out of India, right? And in addition to that, they built railroads across India. And they educated a bunch of civil servants who could run India in a modern way, which is not to say that so the West didn't give them a choice about becoming part of the modern world, but did make that possible. Look, people like Mohandas Gandhi went to London, and became a lawyer in the 1890s, and then spent his 25 years in South Africa before he went back as a revolutionary. So it's much more complicated, and so I did feel a little bit guilty about. I mean, I think it's a corrective of for students nowadays in in the colleges that I teach at to get the message that this mission was kind of tainted with all of this, and Cecil Rhodes did go on to to use Maxim guns against 80,000 Zulu spearmen, and and that all of that stuff happened, and that asymmetric warfare begins with with the people that imperialists are killing not being able to face them on battlefields and having to find other ways. So because students of today, when they hear asymmetric warfare, if they know what it means at all, they think, well, that's what terrorists do. Sorry, that was a long rant.
No,
That's fine.
Yeah, I often wonder about, well, hang on a minute. We didn't give you those railways. We made you buy them from us. is missing from your conversation. That's part of the extract. This, I can't remember who it was now. Heinkel, whatever his name is. Jason Henkel did a review of the Indian academic that went through and did the calculation. And his write-up gives you the examples of how it was done, and then it was a bit evened out, a bit more, made a little bit more accessible through, there's a ex-Tory MP that's now the occasional broadcaster, does a lot of stuff on railways because he's been a bit of a railway nut. But he did 5 or 6 programs about empire, some of which was pre-revolution review about you guys,
Yeah.
and others included the bit about the Hong Kong stroke. Let's make all these drug addicts
Right.
and take the money. But he also went through the Indian thing, and there were elements of, once we had to spank the East Indian Company, which was part of what Wesley was doing, for being stupid because they allowed the Indians to mutiny and it cost a lot of money.
1857, yeah.
Yeah. So that at that point they became the part of the British Empire as opposed to the corporate empire.
Right.
And it was like, we'll lend you the money at a decent rate of interest for you to then buy our goods back after we've cheated you out of buying.
Oh yeah, I'm not suggesting that it was at all fair or anything.
No.
Yeah.
But
they didn't give the I missed mine. They didn't give them the
I realize
they forced the railroads on them.
Yeah. But it was the mechanism to me when I first, unless you actually go to get that detail, you don't necessarily realize we're going to tax you on the money we fucking lent you.
Yeah.
We're going to tax you because you're earning interest to pay back.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, and let me not only agree with you, Tim, but let me say that that's the whole first section of this book. Is that logic? Development is that, right? All of this stuff, all of this globalization. That's what it's for, and that's who it's for, and all of that. That's my
part of what I was going to say when we first went that way about 25 minutes ago was, and we said about the number of Africans, 1.9 billion or whatever the number was. My immediate reaction from being a circular economy or a circular economics stroke regenerative thing. Okay. What are they going to do, and how are we going to feed them?
Yeah.
Because one thing in my mind is there's all these things about, we'll go back and remember Wellington again. In Wellington's lifetime, we've gone from being at least 50% kids on average die before they're the age of 10, all the way up to Hans Rosling and his growing bubbles and all this.
Yep.
So I've got relatives at my grandparents' level. My great aunt Betty had 6 kids. She outlived 3 of them.
Yeah.
2 of them died in childhood. 1 died in her 50s with cancer. So that's a slightly different problem. So, but it's like I don't know anybody relatively well who had a child die preschool age or school age outside of an accident. I know quite a few of my friends.
My father lost 2, but yeah, nobody in my generation that stopped. None of my cousins, none of those families.
So on that basis, and with what we've learned with Graeber amongst other things, and what I see here is, my brother died, so I'll take on board his wife. She may still be at childbearing age.
Right.
So all of a sudden, he's now got his 4th wife, because you're allowed 4 without permission. Number 5 has to come with written permission. You've got these relatively large families with all these half brothers and half siblings, which makes who's the real cousin and who's not a real cousin a real interesting question.
Sure, yeah.
But if you look at it here, and when my father turned up here, it was still the Trucal states. So this was pre-independence. So they were still very much a third world country. And when I arrived,
I didn't realize your family was multi-generationally there.
Yeah, Dad was here for a short period.
Interesting.
He was here for less. He was here for less than a year, but multiple visits to add up to a year.
Yeah.
Whereas in terms of Germany, Switzerland, and Norway for work, for me, I probably add up to a year plus in each. But there've been multiple visits over a short span, 5 or 6 years. I was probably easily a year in each of those countries. But that doesn't make me Swiss or German or Norwegian, right? Here, I've come here at 2008, and other than working elsewhere in the Gulf, almost every weekend I've been back here if I've not gone somewhere else for the weekend.
So that's
Whether
all.
it be back to UK or back over to Singapore for a different lot of shopping or whatever.
Right.
And I look at here and I go, so I'm now interacting with Africans as opposed to Caribbeans, which is the norm back in my youth.
And in America, yeah.
In the UK, our original blacks were virtually all Caribbean. There were relatively very few from here. A good proportion of the Indians we have in the UK were from this region, but also Africa, because when the empire collapsed, all these educated Indians that came to administer for us,
that
weren't
was
allowed to
lawyer
go back
for
to
down in
India.
South Africa.
Weren't allowed to go back. Weren't allowed to go back to India. And so all of the Indians that Idi Amin kicked out, almost all of those went back to the UK.
Yeah, I imagine I hadn't thought about it, but I imagine the English blacks are probably post 1808 Caribbeans because they were set free and kind of set loose into the empire.
And then of course late 50s there was the Windrush event where we said to the empire, meaning India, Ceylon, Pakistan, Caribbean, African countries, could you please send us your doctors and nurses and teachers and toilet cleaners and stuff? Because there's not enough of us to run, So I can remember programs that were BBC drama programs that are trying to talk about social issues. So you get this black Caribbean woman come over because she's a nurse. And so she's in a bed and breakfast to start with. And the landlady doesn't want to give her a white towel because she's not sure about how much the black comes in.
How much did the Kenya conflict impact that?
The Kenya conflict was my parents' generation national service. So a number of my friends from school, their dads went out to the Mau Mau thing. And there the racism was reversed because you're the white boys from Britain. We'll put you at the bottom of a hill, the Mau Mau are near the top, and we'll come over slowly from the other side, said the King's Own African Rifles, which is white officers, black NCOs downwards. And when we get to the top, we'll fire off a very pistol or something, and you can run up and chase them up to our guns. Except all these boys from London have never seen a 3,000-foot hill in Kenya. Never mind the temperatures. So out of the 500 that start running, like 5 get to the top. And so you get those stories. I've got relatives that were in bombing the Marsh Arabs in Iraq, rather. And I've got one great uncle who touched on the last time the Maoris in New Zealand got uppity.
Wow.
Other than that, I keep thinking about, well, half my family's bloody Welsh. Why are we not kicking the English nuts in anyway? Which in my childhood we did in rugby all the time. The Rugby Six Nations, France, Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland, and Italy, and occasionally Romania, of all countries. Back when I was a teenager, it was who comes second after Wales, and then when I'm now in my 20s and similar, it was who comes second or third after England, stroke Bath versus New Zealand and everybody else.
Right. Right.
Mainly because they had this guy called John Onuma, who was like 8'2" and 9 foot wide.
Well, and then they just developed that whole culture.
Yeah. But
and then they get to be
unfortunately,
the
he was
Orcs
also
and Peter Jackson.
he was also like the Sri Lankans. The Polynesians have got this genetic problem about the people that get too big, and you've got a Hawaiian ukulele player that died in his 30s or something.
Right. Israel, what's his name? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, it's really weird to see this huge guy with this really high voice. John Onuma was a bit like that. He'd got the I think it was liver or kidney failure due to the thing. And I've got a Sri Lankan friend here who's like, he's about my height, but he's about my height wide as well. And
well, I'll see you and raise you, Andre the Giant.
No, I'm just under 6. But he's also got the old women's type gull wing type problem where he's got so much fat on his bicep area, and he really wobbles. And it's almost liquid type fat. It's not the hard fat that you see on something. But it's like, you know, as you say, about 1.9 billion Africans. What are you going to do for employing them? How do we give them a mobile phone? Because that's how we do banking in Africa, right? Where are we going to get all the rare earths? Are we going to have to invite China for it?
Where are we going to get the water?
Where do we
And that was another thing that I didn't find in this book, right? Was the whole, we're talking about, the World Bank, we're talking about the IMF, and then we were even talking about, Evo Morales. I mean, when did Evo Morales become famous? It was in 2000 during the water wars in Cochabamba, when he was the head of the Cocaleros Union up the hill, and he declared solidarity with the strikers down in the city center, right? So so that that one was not Nestle or one of those Vendi or one of those European companies. That was
Dakota.
Bechtel was trying to put in that Cochabamba water system, Agua de Tunari they called it, but it was really Bechtel, and so that was an American thing. I mean, Bechtel had built the Hoover Dam, for crying out loud, so their history with that goes all the way back, to the beginning. But that whole idea that these resources are going to be tied to development goals, that people are held hostage for their World Bank or IMF debt is, and that was the whole thing. I mean, it was kind of weird because in Bolivia at the time, Hugo Balzer, who had been the dictator, but had then, but by that time was an elected president. He had sort of stepped down as a military dictator and then been elected as president, was using. I mean, they were trying to nationalize or to privatize the water system in La Paz and El Alto, which is the shantytown up the hill from La Paz, at the same time. And he was deploying in 2000, and he was deploying the Dalmatas, which were the La Paz kind of military police, against both those strikers and the ones in Cochabamba. So I mean, those are types of stories that you have to consider when when they're writing these generalities about an anti-Western, anti-globalist, or alter globalist, as they. I mean, okay, so they changed the term anti-globalist to alter globalist. Big win, give me a break.
Oh, it's like the anti-Afra people.
Yeah.
But it's always I can't remember when I started worrying about it, or if the thought went, but I never followed it through. Is if we're now getting the childhood mortality rate down so low, how fast does the cultural change mean that I'm one of two siblings?
Right. Well, Hans
I,
Rosling,
I,
Hans Rosling had an interesting point that he made on that in a little short YouTube video that I used with my students a lot, and it was something that Melinda Gates had said too, actually, that that it was that security, social security in society, real social security, and educating women were kind of the two keys to that, right? That
yeah,
and he compared like Afghanistan and someplace Indonesia, I think it might have been. And he said that that these that they're both Muslim places. Afghanistan's population is going to grow like 50x in the next 50 years or whatever, and Indonesia has achieved Western style replacement, if that kind of a scenario, and it
yeah.
was all based
That,
on those two things. He said, women are
yeah,
educated in Indonesia, and nobody fears.
yeah, and the education includes family planning.
Right, right, but also,
Mhm.
but also just that they have options, and that they don't that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't have to have five kids,
but
because you don't expect two or three of them to die, and you don't expect to need your kids to feed you when you're old, and all of that.
yeah, yeah. It's a double-ended sword in that context. It's
Yeah.
it's childhood pit problems and post-retirement type
End
problems.
of life problems. Yeah, but and if you can't, well, and maybe that's an interesting place to end on, is what we're talking about to a great extent is the idea that people should trust institutions, and people should trust their community and their society more than they trust their families. And
Mm.
and that family, I mean, and that in I mean, my dad would say, in the peasant world that we came from, only a couple of generations ago, that's why it's Southern Italian gangster stories are all about, never go against the family, because that's where the rubber hits the road, when you
Mm.
can't trust the church, you can't trust the government, you can't trust the mafia in southern Italy is
Mm.
working against the people too. They're just raking, everything they can get off the top, right? So nobody outside the family can be trusted, right? And so that is, and that's the advantage that we've had in the West, right, for the longest time, at least for those of us who are inside the club,
Uh,
right?
Well,
We've been able to depend
on
on society, in a way that made family less important. And maybe
well,
that continues, maybe that changes.
yeah. The other little thing to add just for close from a slightly different direction. You commented about the 100 years with no war in Europe. That was a fiction.
Uh,
One of the good memes that particularly came up pre-Brexit and still floats around is post-war, post World War II. There's been no war in Western Europe, even as Western Europe has grown, and thinking of it as being those places inside and associated with what is now
mhm.
the EU.
Yep.
Mm.
Since World War II, and the closest we've got to anything as a hiccup is things like the breakup of the Yugoslavian Communist Republic, such that
A
but
lot
you
of
then
people were
end
killed.
up with, yeah,
There's
yeah,
some ethnic
but,
cleansing.
but
It wasn't a
yeah,
perfect.
so it then becomes Christians versus Muslims rather than necessarily just country versus country. And of course, being here, I see lots of the people that left that problem.
Yeah.
Mm.
So but I also see Christians and Muslims that came from the ex-Yugoslavia happy as Larry here.
Mm.
Mm.
You know, and back when they were both sitting in Sarajevo, they were shooting at each other.
Yeah. Well, at least
In fact,
now where they are now, they can reminisce about Sarajevo. Oh, remember that
yeah,
place? Oh, I used to go there.
yeah. But they're not allowed to own a firearm here unless you're over.
That's probably safe.
Yeah.
Anyways,
See,
we
gun
are.
laws work. Gun laws work. There was that classic joke recently, apparently, that the GOP can't answer.
Hmm.
Why are there more shootings in schools than in prison in the US?
They can't answer that question. God.
Apparently, the GOP are stumped.
Wow. Okay, that's a sad note to end on. All right, so section 2 next week.
Section 2.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Section 2. Yep. All right. Have a good week. Ciao.
Enjoy.